Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Inke Kavat. Today, my very special guest is Heino Klinck. He is a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia. Heino, a very warm welcome to you on Taiwan Talks today.
Thank you so much.
So recently, the US and Australia have announced a raft of initiatives in the security space. What impact or how important are they for the South China Sea or for Taiwan?
The American footprint will increase in Australia on a rotational basis. As I'm sure you're aware, the force flow of American troops is increasing in northern Australia, primarily between Air Force, Army, and Marines in particular. And I think coming within the context of AUKUS as well, you'll see a growing U.S. Navy footprint in Australia. And all this is meant to, I think, enhance deterrence in the region and be prepared to also, if need be, respond to crises and contingencies.
So why the need to increase that deterrence now?
Well, I think it goes beyond the obvious to state that with respect to Chinese aggression and adventurism, in the South China Sea in particular, we see what's been happening vis-a-vis the Philippines. You here in Taiwan feel the Chinese pressure literally every single day. The new normal that the Chinese have been establishing in the Taiwan Strait, in the airspace and the seas around Taiwan, not to mention what the Chinese are doing vis-a-vis Japan as well.
And what do you think is behind Beijing's actions, behind its military buildup?
Well, that's obviously, an interesting question, and the only ones that can really answer that are the Chinese and the Chinese leadership in Zhongnanhai. I personally believe that the Chinese want to establish themselves as the regional hegemon, the geopolitical power in the region that will have sway over any decisions that are being made here, to the detriment, again, of democracies, and of course also to the detriment, in particular, of U.S. relationships with Asian partners and allies that have been long-standing.
And how do you think Beijing views this? Do they view the U.S. as an enemy or simply a competitor?
Well, I would tell you that, again, as somebody who spent most of his adult life in the U.S. military focused on the PLA, I'm pretty confident in saying that the PLA views the United States as, as their primary potential adversary and rival, and they train to be able to defeat the United States more so than anything else.
And how long do you think they've held that view? I mean, we're, as you said, waking up to that concept. But
I think that's been the case for decades, candidly. I would say probably since the 1996-97 missile crisis. That would be my assessment.
It's interesting that you were based in China as a military attaché to the US Embassy in Beijing for several years. What was your primary objective?
So a number of things. I mean, obviously I was a liaison between the U.S. military and the PLA, and we actually had a very robust relationship in that period of time.
Which years was this?
2004 to 2008 in Beijing. We spent a lot of time doing exchanges. I spent a lot of time taking U.S. military delegations to China and PLA delegations to the United States. So that was obviously an important aspect of the job. Another important aspect of the job was, of course, learning as much as I possibly could about the PLA, which is difficult in an autocratic society like China, because it's not like Chinese military officers would talk to me. But it was a very interesting period of time. It was a period of time where I think the United States, with the benefit of hindsight, naively thought that the more contact we would have with the Chinese, with the PLA in particular, the better it would be for us. And now again, I kind of question the naivete in which we operated in, because I don't think, frankly, it garnered us any benefit.
What do you think that they gained from that period where, as you said, you were being very open,
That's
they were
right.
going to the US, probably military
Yes,
bases?
That's right. I think the Chinese certainly learned as much as they possibly could from us. We were certainly more transparent than they were. We certainly gave them more access to military facilities than they gave to us. So I think the Chinese were able to glean certain things that they have probably incorporated into their operating concepts and the like.
What sort of thing do you have in mind?
So I think, for instance, carrier operations. So at that point, I don't remember the exact timing, but when I was in Beijing, they did not have a carrier yet, or they had just bought this old Ukrainian Hulk of a and now they're building multiple aircraft carriers. I think they're about to build a fourth one, right? And they have plans for more. So I think that being able to visit, even if it was just, again, superficially, to be able to see how an aircraft carrier operates, if anything, at least it provided motivation. And I don't mean to imply that we showed them the crown jewels and we let them have free reign. We didn't. But I think being able to exposing the Chinese to our military to the extent that we did not really serve our purposes. It certainly served their purposes.
So you think that they gained more from the US?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that I would say unequivocally.
Okay. And how has that period shaped your understanding of China?
So I think that, again, overarchingly, China and the CCP have a lot more strategic patience than the United States does. And I think part of it is a cultural thing. Yeah. And I think part of it is also the political systems are obviously different. In the United States and in most democracies, we focus on election cycles and we're kind of bound by those. The Chinese Communist Party has a plan, has always had a plan. And they are able, because of the continuity of leadership, to be able to implement that plan. That's why I think it's important that, again, in the United States and elsewhere, we've kind of turned around now in our perspective on China. And if there's anything that, frankly, it's a bipartisan issue in Washington, is the perspective on China. And it's allowing us now to develop a more long-term approach. That was missing before. I think, again, with a certain amount of hubris and maybe even a certain amount of cultural arrogance, we were not, we thought that we might be able to change the CCP and the intent of the party. And I think that's wrong. That was wrong. And in hindsight, perhaps, we have now come to grips with that, whether it was not just the military arena, but also in the economic space. When you think about, the Americans, advocating in essence on Chinese behalf for entry into the WTO.
So do you think it's too late to reverse that process? If we could look at the military, I'd like your assessment of the PLA now, after this single-minded focus for decades.
Right. So I don't think it's ever too late to do the right thing. I think that it will take determination, though, and I think that no single country can do it on its own. So the greatest strength that the United States has, its partnerships and alliances throughout the world, including in East Asia. That's the one thing the Chinese don't have. Nobody's clamoring to be an ally of the Chinese. I mean, the only...
Russia,
sure,
Iran,
sure. Well, the
North
only
Korea.
treaty they actually have is with the North Koreans.
Yes, right.
Ironically, there has been, whether we want to admit it or not, and basically an establishment of blocs again. And I think that that also serves to give democratic nations a reason to cooperate. So I don't think it's too late. I think that we see a lot of positive trend lines. If you think about, again, the military arena, The Japanese have had historic changes in terms of policy and investments in their military. The Australians with AUKUS is, again, unprecedented. It basically means the United States is willing to share its crown jewels, submarine nuclear technology, propulsion, of course, with another country. That's a huge deal. I think Taiwan is coming around also. President Tsai did a lot to enhance Taiwanese military preparedness, also raising the budget, the defense budget. And I read this morning President Lai is increasing the defense budget. Those are all
19.74 billion, not quite 3%.
Yeah, that's right. So, so these are all positive trend lines. This has to be done though on a sustained basis and for a longer period of time. So we can't look at this just as 1 year, okay, 2024, great job. It has to be continued.
Or even one election cycle.
That's right, absolutely. And I again believe that based on Chinese behavior everywhere, I think this will continue. And I think again, in Europe in particular, and I spent a considerable amount of time in Europe, if you look at, for instance, the declaratory statements of NATO and the NATO strategic concept, now talking about China for the last several years, and of course the Chinese support to Russia, enabling the Russian war of aggression, and continuing to do that in the third year of this war. In Europe, they are also acknowledging now that you can't just worry about China and Asia, and the Americans are going to take care of it. They have a stake in this as well.
You mentioned Japan's historic changes to its security. There was the recent announcement that the U.S. forces would be upgraded in Japan to come under a three-star, a three-star general. It's understood, though, that Tokyo wanted a four-star general, and that general would be able to command both forces, similar to what the arrangement is in South Korea.
Correct.
Why do you think Washington didn't do that?
So I think what's important here is that U.S. Forces Japan will be turned into an operational command, and that the commander of USFJ, it's a three-star now. It's been a three-star, so that general will get new roles and missions. And conceivably it could be an admiral at one point also. I believe that the focus on the rank of the individual is misplaced, candidly. I would not be concerned about that if I was Japan at this point. And I also don't think that that's necessarily a final decision that could be reviewed in the future. I think what's important is that the United States and Japan are working in tandem, because this American command is going to be basically partnered with a new command that the Japanese have set up, the Japanese Joint Operational Command. And so we'll be doing more things operationally together.
But the aspect, I guess, that they honed in on is commanding one U.S. commander, commanding both Japanese and U.S. forces together. I understand that's what happens in South Korea.
That's right, and that's the only place where we have that type of relationship, and we do not currently have that relationship in Japan. And I think that there are probably on the Japanese side more constraints on that type of relationship than on the United States. Right. So again, Korea is very, very unique. And again, there are some parallels to Japan, but not everything is necessarily applicable.
You mentioned, of course, the defense spending of Taiwan. Now, there's also a massive backlog in arms to Taiwan, $19 billion. And I think if we were being honest, no amount of GDP spend could help Taiwan to catch up with China. So in your view, what do you think Taiwan should be focusing on that you don't see it is focusing on now?
So overarchingly, I think the trend lines are positive. When I think about the types of discussions I had with Taiwanese counterparts when I was in government, and advocating for certain things, and having made some progress in some areas, but not in others. I think the last several years has been lots of progress made, so that's good. I also, acknowledge that the United States has not had a good track record on delivering capabilities on time and on budget. If it makes my Taiwanese friends feel any better, that's not just the Taiwan issue. We're bad about that across the board with all of our partners and allies. That's not meant as an excuse, it's just the reality. And I think that the war in Ukraine has now put more of a priority on fixing those types of things. That being said, in Taiwan, it's not just about military hardware, it's about training, it's about modern concepts of operation, and I think it's also about a whole of society approach to a possible contingency that involves Chinese aggression. And I think that there can be resources, more resources invested in those areas. Because one of the things that has struck me in my many, many visits to Taiwan, sometimes I talk to Taiwanese friends and I'm more concerned about Taiwanese security than they are. And I, as an outsider, believe that the Chinese present an existential threat to Taiwan. And I think that that perhaps that needs to be more inculcated within Taiwanese society, because I think it is reality. And for a place that faces such an existential threat, I think that more is needed, and I think you have to have more societal buy-in. And there are many places in the world where I think there are applicable examples. I think Israel in particular is an example that is applicable to Taiwan, and I don't see Taiwanese society or the Taiwanese government acting with a sense of urgency that, and consistency that, for instance, Israeli governments, regardless of what party was in power, and I'm not talking about only in the post-October 7th era, but before. I think Taiwan, again, and I want to commend Taiwan on all the progress that has been made, but it is not enough. And I would say it will never be enough, because as you see, you're facing a behemoth. But I think Taiwan will be well served by demonstrating its resolve. And I think the more resolve that you can show in terms of budget allocations for defense, societal resilience, societal involvement, all those things will also serve to convey to your friends worldwide that you're vested in your own defense. And when you're vested in your own defense to the maximum extent possible, other countries will be too.
Linked to that, and also we mentioned about election cycles, so former President Donald Trump could be looking at becoming the next president. He said Taiwan should pay the US for protection against China. So what's interesting about that, if you read it on the surface level, it seems to be introducing a strategic clarity. You pay us, we will defend you. How did you read the comment?
So I prefer to actually focus on policies and less on personalities and less on individual quotes in media reporting. So I was in the Trump administration, and I was responsible for defense policy with Taiwan. So I know what the United States has done and continues to do in support of Taiwan. And this was all obviously part of Trump administration's strategy, which again, as I mentioned, 2017 and 2018, the first time we have actually publicly stated, which many of us have privately known for a long time, that China is the biggest threat to security and to, frankly, our way of life. So the Trump administration then took many steps to strengthen our cooperative engagements with Taiwan, other partners and allies in the region. As a matter of fact, I was the most senior DoD official to visit Taiwan since 1979. So from a policy perspective, I'm very confident that that will serve as an indicator of what a second Trump administration would do.
I want to go back to the great power rivalry between the US and China. If you were in China, how would you view, the US strategy towards and actions towards China?
So I think there is a certain bunker mentality in Beijing that the United States is basically, cajoling the international community to try to put China in a box, and that the Chinese, feel, at best resentment towards that, and that the United States wants to be able to maintain its primacy over China. I think some of that is probably, candidly, well-founded. Other parts of it are perhaps a little bit hyperbolic and perhaps even border on paranoia. The United States has demonstrated throughout history that it doesn't want to contain China. It wants to make China part of the international world order. Again, the United States having supported the WTO entry for China, the fact that the United States has been a security exporter in this region since the end of World War II, which has benefited China being able to develop and grow. I think where we have now drawn the line, because again, this realization that the Chinese are using all the tools at their disposal to undermine the international world order to their benefit. And of course, if you listen to what Xi has said, if you read what comes out of the Chinese Communist Party, they view the West in decline. They believe that they will be able to attain primacy and rewrite the international world order. And I think that is not in any of our interests.
Do you think that the US could envisage a world where, there are multi-poles, as in China's view?
I think we find ourselves in that type of scenario right now. The United States cannot act unilaterally, even if it wanted to. I think is the reality. And
does it need to be more attractive to, say, the global South, though, that seems to support Russia and China? Can it offer,
So I think that the global South is, of course, competitive territory, if you will, between varying models of governance. The United States and other democracies offer a model that allows for, obviously, democratic expression of ideas, capitalism, and not an autocratic form of government where the government dictates everything. There are parts of the global South where this is attractive. There are other parts of the global South where autocracy and the elite make the rules, and they don't find this attractive because it obviously is counterproductive for the elite. The Chinese Communist Party has been very, very good at elite capture, basically controlling through various means the elite strata of society in much of the global South, not caring about the people, candidly. So the U.S. and the West can offer a different model, but it is not necessarily universally applicable, because in a lot of these places where economic development is lackluster at best, the Chinese model of economic growth with political repression, that is, for some, more attractive, frankly. That being said, I don't think we should cede that space to the Chinese or the Russians, whether it be in Africa, Latin America, or parts of Asia, and the Middle East. But that will be challenging. That will be challenging. And that's why, again, it should not just be a U.S.-China competition. The U.S. working with its partners and allies. And again, I'm not talking about in the military arena, but in the development arena, aid and assistance to various countries. It's doing that in a coordinated fashion so that there are options available, I think needs to be further explored and enhanced.
And finally, you said it's not a US-China thing, though it is the most consequential relationship in the world, the two biggest powers. Do you think that they can rebuild this relationship? What would it take?
I think we need to have an objective view on what the relationship should look like. That means ensuring that, again, on a bilateral basis, American interests and values are protected and furthered candidly. But you have to have a realistic outlook. I think that sense of reality and realism, we just ignored it for too long, and the Chinese took advantage of us. And I think now understanding more and more what the Chinese long-term strategy is, and seeing their actions. I mean, again, we have historical examples in recent history from where Chinese intent was very, very clear, and just the obfuscation of things such as during the COVID outbreak demonstrates that we have to first and foremost be guided by protecting and furthering our interests and having a realist approach to what a China led by the Communist Party is seeking. Without that sense of reality, I think everything we would be doing would be in vain.
Okay. Heino Klinck, thank you so much for your time today on Taiwan Talks.
Thank you for having me.